Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in, and it's my pleasure, as always, to be here to continue our discussion, our reading and discussion of the book Codeword Barbelon by P.D. Stewart, Book 2 of the series, subtitled Antichrist is a Woman Alive and Well Again. Get this book from luxverbi.org. That's luxverbi.org. One of the most important books in my library. Very contemporary information that you'll find very useful today. And yesterday we concluded with the last paragraph on page 73, and for continuity we'll read it again. The Ku Klux Klan is, of course, a Masonic organization, and the author gives us a reference, a citation for that statement. Former Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest, Freemason of Algerona Lodge, number 168, Tennessee, founded, or rather united the fledgling, that is the Ku Klux Klan, in 1866 and served as its imperial wizard, and Albert Pike held the office of Chief Justice of the Ku Klux Klan while he was simultaneously Sovereign Grand Commander of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry Southern Jurisdiction. And William Joseph Whalen, in his Christianity and American Freemasonry, also is cited in this book, as well as Stetson Kennedy in his work After Appomattox, How the South Won the War. So the link between Jesuitism and Freemasonry is not hyperbole. Freemasonry you can regard as just an adjunct to the Jesuit order. It serves ultimately the purposes of the Pope. And I know this will sound shocking if there happen to be any Freemasons listening to the program this morning, but the lower levels of Freemasonry are never told what Freemasonry is really all about. It's only those at the top who really understand who it serves. And we'll just let it go at that for now. We'll deal with Freemasonry on another program. And also, it says, the rumor has it that Barack Obama is a high-ranking Freemason, either a Prince Hall Freemason or a member of the Martinist order. And the author gives us a citation from wikipedia.org on Martinism, and he says about Martinism that it too is in all likelihood a Jesuit adjunct. So the Jesuit order runs Freemasonry, the Ku Klux Klan, and also Martinism, the Martinist order. And as if to prove the rumor true, on Tuesday, January 20th, 2009, the Masonic Lodge, William R. Singleton Hope, Lebanon, Lodge number 7 of the District of Columbia, hosted what it called, quote, the first Masonic inaugural ball. They were very happy that Barack Obama, this Jesuit temporal coadjutor, if not a Jesuit himself, they were very happy that Barack Obama became president. They held a ball in his honor. And the ball was held on Inauguration Day at 8 p.m. at Stars Bistro, 2120 P Street Northwest, Washington, D.C. Mr. Obama did not attend, of course, as that was his inauguration day as president. Of course, claims that Mr. Obama is a Freemason are only rumors, admits the author. Nevertheless, his appearance from quote-unquote nowhere, his surprising elevation at the 2004 Democratic Convention to the front of the United States national politics, not to mention his subsequent nomination over Hillary Rodham Clinton to run for the presidency, seems to defy mere coincidence and is simply inexplicable. And I will just add, except for the fact that he was groomed from the get-go by the Jesuits to occupy the White House and to continue the papal agenda for this country. Now, here's another noteworthy fact. In May of 2008, Senator Barack Obama's candidacy for the Democratic presidential nomination received the wholehearted backing of communist dictator Fidel Castro. Castro said Mr. Obama was, quote, the most powerful progressive candidate to the United States presidency. And here we have photographs of the official advertisement or invitation for the Masonic inaugural ball in honor of the 44th President of the United States, Barack Obama, sponsored by William R. Singleton Hope Lebanon Lodge Number 7. Freemasonry held a ball for Barack Obama, and here's the cover of the Cuban magazine entitled Grandma, published in Havana, May 26, 2008, with a great big picture of Barack Obama, and it says, "World's #1 crypto-Marxist." So, the Jesuit Masonic world was thrilled that Barack Obama won the election. Now, Chapter 10 is entitled Sugar for the Villains, Pain for the Victims, but the Winner Takes All. Begins with a quote from God's holy word, Luke chapter 21, verse 25 and 26. "And there will be on the earth distress of nations with perplexity, men's hearts failing them for fear and the expectation of those things which are coming upon the earth." The author begins, "Never before have people been able, indeed encouraged, to buy houses through official government policy, with no assets, no jobs, and little more than pennies to their names. It used to be that before giving a loan or mortgage, the banks would frisk you good to make sure you could repay the debt. Yet under the watchful eyes of President Obama's chosen financial generals, the same men who were in charge under Bush, tens of thousands of Americans were encouraged by their government to buy 2, 3, and even 4 houses with no money down, no deposits, no savings, no security, no jobs, or other assets whatsoever. It was so obvious to all in the industry that these loans were not proper that they were actually called ninja loans. How could anyone, never mind the heads of the Federal Reserve and the United States Treasury, say that they did not know or could not have foreseen that this was courting disaster? Why did the Feds and the Treasury sit and watch it all happen, only acting when it was too late? In a different era, before the American public's consciousness had been dumbed down by media banality, the never-ending sports mania, and Hollywood reality shows, this would have been called engineered catastrophe. But instead, the public swallow the media explanations and continue to put their faith in another Jesuit-trained American president. He continues under the heading of not too long ago. He says, "It used to be the case not too long ago that the United States Congress would argue over every penny that they had to spend on essential services and programs. Now they have to pass 2 or sometimes 3 separate bills into law for $8.5 trillion, representing 60% of the United States gross domestic product. If the United States did not have the money 2 years ago, where did this $8.5 trillion come from? America does not have this money." And the author provides a note. He says, on Wednesday, November 26, 2008, the San Francisco Chronicle confirms, quote, "The Fed lends money from its own balance sheet, or by essentially creating new money. Most of the money, about $5.5 trillion, comes from the Federal Reserve, which is an independent entity, does not need congressional approval to lend money to banks or, in, quote, unusual and exigent circumstances, unquote, to other financial institutions. The Federal Reserve Bank simply prints money and then loans it to our government. They create it out of thin air, and then they loan it to our government at usury, and then you and I pay for it. It is sin on a biblical scale. Now it says a bankrupt government has repealed the laws of economics to bail out these corrupt banks. By means of several handouts said to be loans, the United States government poured trillions of dollars into select United States banks and other financial institutions, the black hole of financial no returns. Jim Rogers, one of the world's foremost international investors, declared that most big United States banks are totally bankrupt. But what does the United States government care? After all, it now owns the banks. Those banks that were of no use to the secret government that rules the White House, like Washington Mutual, for example, were closed by the Federal Office of Thrift Supervision because they were considered to be unsound, according to the regulator, and so left out in the cold. As the Sunday Times commented, quote, Washington Mutual, or WAMU, as the bank became known, has survived 2 world wars and the Great Depression to become the largest savings and loan in America, with 2,200 branches, 43,000 employees, and $188 billion on deposit, and recent events have leveled the financial giant. Reader, do you see what has happened here? This bank was too big to fail, but it was allowed to fail because it was the bank of the poor and the average American, unlike the Jesuit-owned Bank of America or the likes of Goldman Sachs. It seems clear on the facts before us that the federal government's response to the quote-unquote engineered financial crisis has been to give sugar to the villains and pain to the victims. The rich are storing up for the last days. That prophecy is being fulfilled right before our very eyes. And God has seen their iniquity, has seen their fatness, has seen their thefts and lies and perjuries. And He's coming to render justice, blind justice. And I can't wait for the day. Now, chapter 11 of the book is entitled, How It All Began, a Snapshot. Quote, we were at the brink of catastrophe at the beginning of the year, but we have walked some distance back from the abyss, unquote, was the view of Lawrence Summer, director of the White House's National Economic Council in 2009. The question is, how far back from the abyss are we now? And how did we come so close to start with? Here are some crucial events that took us to the brink of the abyss. On July 31st, 2007, 2 Bear Stearns funds that invested in mortgage securities filed bankruptcy. On August 9, 2007, French bank BNP Paribas freezes 3 funds with United States mortgage exposure, helping to spark a worldwide credit squeeze. On October 11, 2007, the Dow Jones Industrial Averages hit its all-time high of 14,279 during the afternoon. It all goes downhill from here. On October 30th, 2007, among mounting losses, Merrill Lynch CEO Stan O'Neill resigns. On November 4th of 2007, Citigroup CEO Charles Prince steps down. On January 11, 2008, Countrywide Financial in big trouble. Bank of America agrees to buy them out. On March 16, 2008, Bear Stearns collapses. J.P. Morgan Chase buys them up at a garage sale price with federal government money, which means tax money. That means yours and my money, to the tune of $30 billion. On July 11, 2008, IndyMac Bank collapses and becomes the third largest bank failure in United States history. On September 5th of 2008, Silver State Bank is closed and becomes the 11th bank failure for the year. On September 7th, 2008, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac look wobbly. The federal government takes them over and pays $200 billion of public money. September 15, 2008, a 158-year-old Lehman Brothers is forced to file for bankruptcy. At $630 billion, it registers as the largest bankruptcy ever in United States history and sparks a chain reaction, sending credit markets around the world into disarray. The same day, Merrill Lynch is in trouble. Once again, the Jesuit-owned Bank of America to the rescue, agreeing to buy out Lehman's for $50 billion. September 16, 2008, world's largest insurer, AIG, on the ropes. Federal government takes them over for $85 billion in public funds. The nation's first money market fund collapses and is frozen. On September 17, 2008, stock market down 9% in 2 days. Gold posts its biggest 24-hour gain percentage in actual dollar amount in history. Russian stock market is closed for 2 days after it dives 25%. On September 18, 2008, Paulson and Bernanke, no, not the firm, but the men at the Federal Reserve, extended federal insurance to around $3.4 trillion in money market funds. The same day, Secretary of the Treasury Paulson proposed the biggest financial bailout in United States history that grew from $300 billion to over $700 billion in 3 days without explanation. September 19, 2008, Paulson asked Congress for an unprecedented and unrestricted authority to use taxpayers' money to bail out any financial entity. On September 21, 2008, eager to cash in on the free federal bank-only handouts, Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley suddenly transformed themselves from investment banks to deposit-taking banks. On September 25, 2008, Washington Mutual, the United States' largest savings and loans institution, became the largest bank failure in history and is seized by the Federal Reserve and sold to J.P. Morgan Chase, another Jesuit bank. November 24, 2008, Bloomberg News Service reported that the pledges of the United States to ease frozen credit have now topped $7.7 trillion. This vast amount is equal to approximately 2/3 of our existing national debt. November 26th of 2008, the FDIC added another 54 banks to its problem list. December 12th, 2008, the giant Bank of America Corporation announced that they are eliminating 35,000 jobs. The same day, the conglomerate Citigroup Bank announced the elimination of 53,000 jobs, downsizing by 20%. Clients of Citigroup became anxious when they could not access their account information. The banks gave them the excuse that their computers were down, and they didn't know why. September 25th, 2009, devout Roman Catholic Nancy Pelosi, U.S. Speaker of the House of Congress, threatened or mentioned the imposition of martial law if the House did not push through the $700 billion bailout called the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act of 2008, the EESA. Several senators were angered by this authoritarian power play by Nancy Pelosi, but were placed in an unenviable position and felt forced to vote for the EESA without even having time to peruse the bill. In other words, they didn't even read it. Now, in response to Mrs. Pelosi's power play cited above, Congressman Michael Burgess, Republican of Texas, said, quote, "Madam Speaker," addressing Mrs. Pelosi, "I understand we're under martial law as declared by the Speaker last night," unquote. Congresswoman Kaptur, Democrat from Ohio, also objected, quote, "My message to the American people, don't let Congress seal this deal. High financial crimes have been committed. The normal legislative process has been shelved. Only a few insiders are doing the dealing. Sounds like insider trading to me. These criminals have so much power, so much political power, that they can shut down the normal legislative process of the highest lawmaking body in this land. We are constitutionally sworn to protect and defend this republic against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And my friends, there are enemies. The people pushing this deal are the very ones who are responsible for the implosion on Wall Street. They were fraudulent then, and they're fraudulent now," unquote. Yes, that's right. Even in the halls of Congress, this corruption was exposed and denounced. But the wheels of the collapse of the financial institutions of this country continued to roll, because it was the Jesuits' plan to cause an economic crisis in this country that would seem to justify the need for intervention by the papacy, who suggested in response that we needed a global political authority that could remedy the global financial crisis. Problem, reaction, solution. The Jesuits caused the problem. They managed the reaction of the American public by the press, and then the Pope offered the solution. A global government, a global economic system, and you know that includes a global religion too, a Roman Catholic religion. Now, the book of James in the New Testament speaks of massive financial fraud and consequential disaster in the last days of this earth. Quote, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches are corrupted. Your gold and silver are corroded. Your corrosion will be a witness against you, because you have heaped up treasures in the last day. The wages of the laborers who worked in your fields, your factories, and your businesses, you kept back by fraud, and their cries have reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. You have lived on the earth in wanton pleasure and luxury, but you have fattened your hearts for the day of slaughter. Praise the mighty name of our Savior, coming to redeem us from this Jesuit, Vatican-led New World Order." We're going to return immediately to this prophecy in the book of James, chapter 5, verse 1 through 6. Speaking to these corrupt bankers who have stolen our wealth, he said, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches are corrupted. Your gold and silver are corroded, and their corrosion will be a witness against you, because you have heaped up treasure in the last days. The wages of the laborers who have worked in your fields And today's equivalents of the fields are the factories and the businesses. Their wages you kept back by fraud, and their cries have reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. You have lived on the earth in wanton pleasure and luxury, but you have fattened your hearts for the day of slaughter. Unquote. They have fattened their hearts for the day of slaughter. Our God is not going to let this injustice prevail. It's not going to go unpunished. And those big fat CEOs who have stolen our money, Bernanke and Paulson and all the rest, they have fattened themselves up for the day of slaughter. They'll not get by with it. The author continues, he says, this prophecy is clear. There will be a worldwide financial collapse of wealth in the last days. And another prophecy in Revelation chapter 13 tells us which country will be the epicenter of this meltdown. And Revelation chapter 13 tells us about the United States of America. And if you didn't know that the United States of America was mentioned in Bible prophecy, all you have to do is read Revelation chapter 13 and realize that the first beast is that beast that rose up out of the sea, out of the populated area of the world, the papacy. And the second beast rose up out of the wilderness, out of the unpopulated area of the world. And the second beast, the United States of America, causes the whole world to worship the first beast and creates an image to the beast. In other words, a perfect likeness. A global papal kingdom, just like the old Holy Roman Empire. Only this time it's global. It was brought about by the power and strength of the United States of America, unbeknownst to the majority Protestant population of this country. How could this happen? With Bibles and churches everywhere. With libraries, education, history lessons everywhere. Yet it happened. The United States is creating a global image to the first beast, the Roman Empire. It's mind-boggling. You know, we often think, how could Israel, after miraculously being delivered out of Pharaoh's bondage, could then turn and wish to go back to Egypt? That's exactly what the United States is doing today. They want to go back to Pharaoh. They're not worthy of the liberty wherein Christ has made us free. They want to go back into Egyptian bondage, to Pharaoh's bondage. The modern-day Pharaoh, the Pope of Rome, through this diabolical ecumenical movement. And this country's going to reap the whirlwind. It's easy to blame these greedy, sinful bankers. But it could never have happened if God's people had been aware, had been wise as serpents and harmless as doves, and studied their scriptures and studied history and studied the Protestant Reformation. There never would have been an ecumenical movement in this country. But as goes God's people, so goes the nation. The United States is being destroyed because God's people were not watchful. Now, chapter 12 of the book is entitled, Bringing Governments to Their Knees. Begins with a quote, The economy is dropping into the John, unquote. That in the U.S. Republican dated September 2008. And another quote from Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12. Thou didst weaken the nations. Speaking of Satan and his Antichrist, the Pope of Rome. The author begins trillions of dollars in debt and a $1.35 trillion deficit, growing by more than $18.2 million each hour, or approximately $3.88 billion a day. That is the state of the United States economy. The total U.S. debt has increased by more than $500 billion for each year since 2003. On February 1st, 2010, President Obama forecast that the United States would have a record budget deficit of $1.56 trillion for all of 2010, worse than predicted. In 2008, there were 12 or so big banks in America. Following the financial collapse, there are now just 4. More power in fewer hands, making it easier to enforce the financial and monetary will of the elite. And I'm once again going to remind the listeners who the elite are. It is the Roman Catholic hierarchy. The hierarchy. The priests, the cardinals, the popes, the bishops of the Roman Catholic Church. And it says, in the financial collapse and the subsequent bailout, we have witnessed in plain view a coup d'etat for the invisible force in America, the secret establishment. President Obama's new head of the Federal Reserve refused to disclose to Congress the recipients of his $2 trillion emergency bailout. Quote, for over a year, the Federal Reserve has refused to publicly identify the companies that received over $2 trillion through its emergency lending programs, claiming that disclosure of such records would put the recipients at a competitive disadvantage, writes the Huffington Post. Quoting further, it says, essentially, the public doesn't know who got the taxpayer money, what the recipients paid for it, or whether the taxpayers are getting a good deal, unquote, said reporter Shayan Nasirapur. What a way to siphon away $2 trillion. Under President Obama, as was the case under the last Bush, there is a redistribution of wealth. The wealth of the American people handed over to the very corporations responsible for their financial devastation. And this is what it's all about, the redistribution of wealth. And we've talked about this when we did our dissertation by Richard Bennett, his explanation of the papal encyclical Caritas in Veritate, which means charity in truth. And in brief summary, charity, according to the papacy, means the forced redistribution of the world's wealth, and truth means every man, woman, and child on the planet must comply. The Pope has declared himself the global Robin Hood and is going to bring to heel every man, woman, and child on this planet, and he's going to manage the global redistribution of wealth. And Obama is overseeing this policy being implemented in this country, the redistribution of the United States wealth to other countries around the world. The corporations are assisting in this. Now, as Bill Moyers of PBS said on his television interview of April 3rd, 2009, quote, it was more than greed and incompetence that brought down the United States financial sector and plunged the economy in recession. It was fraud, unquote. Who was behind the fraud and why? The reader should understand that although the federal government uses the word loans to describe the handout of money to these special banks, there's no real expectation of repayment. So they're not loans at all. They're just gifts. Sort of we used the term yesterday, didn't we? A jubilee for the banks. Now, perhaps they will, perhaps they won't. That's up to the banks, says the author. In private life, we would call such transactions cheat, theft, robbery, or even fraud. But as part and parcel of the Bush and now the Obama government transfer of wealth, they call it bailouts. Professor Peter Morici, we cited earlier, speaking to CTV News Canada, had this to say, quote, "The Fed has provided these schemes of finance with fresh funds, cheaply, that they may lend at healthy rates on credit cards, auto loans, and even mortgages. While the Fed cuts the banks slack, the bankers are busy turning the screws on the debtors by raising credit card rates and fees and harassing distressed borrowers with all the zeal of the Roman army sacking Palestine." Heck of a quote, isn't it? He continues, "When times are good, their troops feast like the conquering Roman army. And when they fail, Washington gives them welfare on the gold plates of emperors." Unquote. If only Professor Morici knew how right he is about the Roman army. Reader, these bailouts are a most audacious swindle. The Professor Morici adds, with a note of irony, quote, "The American banks haven't done messing up the global financial system," unquote. And he added, quote, "Barack Obama is really imposing a lot of inefficiencies on the economy, which will come back to haunt the United States of America," unquote. Certainly, it's going to come back and haunt the United States of America. These injustices will not stand on God's balance sheet. Now, under the heading, the United States debt ceiling and the risk of its collapse, the author says, "Is the party over for the dollar?" As of this writing, the latest authorized increase in the United States debt ceiling was to $14.3 trillion by the federal bill H.J. Resolution 45, which was sent to President Barack Obama on February 4, 2010. Obama signed this new ceiling of $14.3 trillion into law on February 12, 2010, and it is now Public Law 111-139. The United States is drowning in debt. The federal government's debts have ballooned so badly, the New York landmark has run out of digits to record the spiraling figure. The total federal pension deficit is somewhere in the region of $23 billion, while the corporate pension black hole is even bigger, a staggering $450 billion. The significance of these pension losses is better appreciated when one realizes that the average U.S. family bank balance is only $29,000, not much of a pension to live on. In a report by the Special Treasury Department, Inspector General Neil Barofsky states that the total exposure of the federal government from its various programs designed to bail out the banking establishment is $23.7 trillion. Borofsky is one of the few watchdogs charged with overseeing the bailout generosity of agents Geithner, Paulson, and Summer. In 2001, the United States debt was $5.7 trillion. The national debt increased $133 billion since Barack Obama became president. Beijing is sitting on some $755.4 billion worth of United States government debt, and Japan on $768.8 billion. The United States Treasury statistics indicate that at the end of 2006, non-U.S. citizens and institutions held 44% of federal debt. That was over 4 years ago. The Bank of International Settlements has stated, quote, foreign investors in U.S. dollar assets have seen big losses measured in dollars and still bigger ones measured in their own currency. While unlikely, a sudden rush for the exits cannot be ruled out completely, unquote. If this unlikely event occurs, the only option will be national bankruptcy. And that's precisely what they have orchestrated. That's what they want. National bankruptcy, and not just for the United States, but of every nation. The old maxim, the debtor is a slave to his creditor, is coming global. And who is our creditor? The Vatican. The Jesuit banks. And they're going to impose a Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order. You want your national debt wiped away? You want a national, an international, a global jubilee? Then you go by our rules. There's a catch. Every time you hold out your hand to the beast, he simply just throws on the cuffs and makes you a slave. And that's exactly what has happened. We've forgotten God's law. We thought God's law only applied to the Jews. But God told us how to manage our money. A fair and just weight. We were not to lend our money out to usury, not God's people. It didn't apply to just the Jews. It applies to the Gentiles too. Those who call themselves Christ's must obey his law or suffer the consequences. If you have a preacher behind the pulpit that says, as most do today, that God's law is dead, crucified with Christ, the law was simply for the Jews, we're under grace now, then ask him. Ask him in front of the congregation. If God's law is dead, why are we so heavily paying the price for breaking his law? The author continues, even the great state of California, America's biggest economy and the world's 8th largest, was said to be on the brink of bankruptcy. On the 4th of October 2009, the UK Observer Guardian ran the headline, quote, will California become America's first failed state? Unquote. California, the playground of the rich and famous, a virtual failed state. Quote, it is clear that we do not yet know what the future holds. We're still in troubled waters. Our wallet is empty. Our bank is closed. And our credit is dried up. Unquote. These are not the words of a Dr. Doom. They are the confession of the governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, humbled by the scale of the crisis. The state of California has a $25 billion budget deficit. Quote, even assuming no significant deterioration in the economy from this point onward, wrote Martin D. Weiss, Ph.D., on June 22, 2009, in an article entitled California Collapsing for moneyandmarkets.com. Writes Paul Harris of The Observer, quote, the state that once held up as the epitome of the boundless opportunities of America has collapsed. From its politics to its economy to its environment and way of life, California is like a patient on life support. At the start of summer, the state government was so deeply in debt that it began to issue IOUs instead of wages. Its unemployment rate has soared to more than 12%, the highest figure in 70 years. The crisis is so deep that Professor Kevin Starr, who has written an acclaimed history of the state, recently declared, quote, California is on the verge of becoming the first failed state in America. If it was an independent country, it would be in the G8. And if it were a company, it would likely be declared bankrupt, unquote. The state has lost virtually all hope of Barack Obama declaring California is too big to fail. California is merely symptomatic of the desperate situation facing all of America and the rest of us too. This is the world's biggest crisis. According to Goldman Sachs, the United States debt will soon be 85% of the U.S. economy. In August of 2009, Deutsche Bank reported that 40% of homeowners in America find themselves with mortgages that exceeded the equity on their properties. For instance, the mortgages exceeded the value of their homes. A Wikipedia statistic, not the most reliable but still sufficiently accurate, states that the estimated U.S. debt per household, including unfunded services, is $59.1 trillion, or $516,000 per household as of November 2008. In the words of Kevin Phillips, author of American Theocracy, quote, all of that adds up to a mess, unquote. A big one. As on January 2010, 1 in 8 Americans lived off food stamps, including 1 in 4 children. America is, in essence, well on its way to becoming a third world nation. America has all the symptoms of a patient taking a last gasp. I want to stop and reiterate something that I've said repeatedly for months. The Vatican simply is leveling the economic or the financial playing field around the world. We're all going to become third world nations. Rome rules best when the people are broke and when the people are ignorant. That's how Rome intends to govern this New World Order, by reducing us all to third world serfs and dumbing us down so we can never comprehend what has happened to us, making us so dependent upon the government, the civil power, which does the papacy's bidding, that we wouldn't dare speak out against it. That's where we're heading. Interesting. America, in essence, is well on its way to becoming a third world nation, says P.D. Stewart. America has all the symptoms of a patient taking a last gasp. America is over as we knew it. We're now going to be lumped into a global, Vatican, Jesuit-led New World Order. The Protestant Reformation is dead. No one even recognizes, generally nobody even recognizes what is happening. And when I talk about these things on amateur radio, all I get is catcalls and jeers and jamming and name-calling and threats. There's simply no capacity among the American people to comprehend this. Not at least in the circles that I deal in on amateur radio. There's simply no comprehension and no willingness to comprehend either. It seems better to just stick one's head in the sand and wait for somebody to kick your backside. And that's exactly what's happening. Ignorance is not bliss, America. Ignorance is not bliss. If you want to learn more about the Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order, tune in to Inquisition Update next week. My name's Tom Kress. Thanks for listening.